we are live in landscape mode. I'm glad I got it right this time. Last couple lives, I would start off with the phone being vertical, and then when I would click go live, I would then try to move it sideways, and it would basically tell me, you can't do that. And so I am glad that we are live and we are in landscape mode, and I don't have to spend the first 5 minutes of the live trying to adjust the settings. Yo, we've got Hot Facts with Robert Reese in the house. I had the privilege of stopping by Hot Facts with Robert Reese last Wednesday, I believe. We had a good conversation about all things DoorDash, Uber Eats, tipping, as well as some boxing talk, as well as some Roscoe's Chicken and Waffles talk, some Bone Thugs and Harmony talk. It was a good conversation, and I look forward to doing it again. Thank you, Hot Facts with Robert Reese, for having me on. Yeah, Robert Reese and I go back. And so I'm going to let the first couple of minutes kind of go by so people can sort of trickle in. Yeah, boy. Yeah, I can't wait to get into this one. But I was saying right when I turned this thing on that I was able to get this thing into landscape mode. I was having issues with that, obviously, the last couple of chats, where I would have it vertically, try to move it to landscape mode, and then it would basically tell me no dice. Dabrowski, what is good with you? Thank you for coming by. Yeah, I just hit Dabrowski up maybe like a few minutes ago. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming through. Yeah, better view for sure. And so, yeah, it's super kind of disorienting when I think that I'm going to be able to hit go live on the phone, then turn it horizontally, and that it's going to continue. But it would block me every time I would try to do that. And so this time we got it right. So some of the things that, and now we are at 6 o'clock. So yeah, we could certainly get going. Some of the things that I want to cover today are, obviously, I want to recap Tank Davis versus Raleigh Romero. I certainly have some thoughts about that one. I've been reading a lot of your thoughts on that fight. Very interesting fight, I thought, with a very abrupt ending, obviously. I'm going to talk just a moment about Erislandy Lara versus Gary Spike O'Sullivan, since that was the major undercard fight on the Tank Davis versus Raleigh Romero Showtime pay-per-view card. I also want to talk a little bit about boxing news. So I want to have like a small section where I kind of run through just a couple of the boxing headlines. One of them is the possibility, or at least the, if I interpreted it correctly, the possible return of Deontay Wilder. Also, Anthony Joshua hiring Robert Garcia, the famed trainer, Mikey Garcia's older brother, former champion, former belt holder himself, Robert Garcia, has trained everybody from Antonio Margarito. For a time, it was Fernando Vargas. He's trained Nonito Donaire. He's trained Brandon Rios. So many different fighters over the years trained by Robert Garcia. Well, that's who Anthony Joshua is reaching out to for additional guidance in his preparation for the rematch with Alexander Usyk, the former undisputed heavyweight champ, who then came up and unexpectedly beat Anthony Joshua and took his 3 heavyweight championship belts. So that's a very interesting hiring for AJ, Anthony Joshua, to go and seek Robert Garcia to bring him in to help prepare him. Interesting. So we're going to get to that. I want to talk about the recent fight announcement between Ryan Garcia. So Ryan Garcia is returning to the ring. It's not going to be against Gervonta Davis. It's not even going to be against Usyk Cruz. It's actually going to be against Javier Fortuna. That's going to take place July 16th. Another fight announcement, Michael Hunter is going to take on Hughie Fury. Hughie Fury, the cousin of Tyson Fury. Michael Hunter, son of former heavyweight Michael the Bounty Hunter. So Michael Hunter is going to return to the ring. His only loss till this day is against the aforementioned Alexander Usyk. That's still the only person who's beaten Michael Hunter. And Michael Hunter has been in the ring with Alexander Povetkin, for instance. Another piece of news that I want to get to a little bit later on. The WBO orders Jermell Charlo versus Tim Tszyu, son of Costa Tszyu, who's been working up the 154 rankings. He's stopped former belt holder Jeff Horn. He recently won via decision in his biggest step-up fight against Terrell Goucher. That was basically his debut on the PBC platform. So a lot of noise being made about Tim Tszyu and the rise of Tim Tszyu. Well, he's going to be next up, mandatory challenger for the newly crowned undisputed champion of the 154-pound division, Jermell Charlo. So basically, Jermell Charlo is going to have several days, and they're going to have, like, I think 20 days to work out the business and to work out a deal between Jermell Charlo and Tim Tszyu. Otherwise, it goes to a purse bid, and Jermell Charlo can also just sidestep the whole mandatory challenge, and in doing so would have to cough up one of his 4 titles, that title again being the WBO belt. And then we're going to preview for a moment George Kambosos versus Devin Haney. This is kind of like a lightweight Super Bowl, if you will. This is a hugely important and consequential fight. All of the belts in this division are on the line. And keep in mind, this is the same division that that Vasily Lomachenko's in, that Teofimo Lopez is, or maybe was if he goes up to 140, but is in. Same division as Ryan Garcia, Gervonta Tank Davis. Well, George Kambosos versus Devin Haney is about to go down. Jay Foreman, what's good? Thank you for stopping by. Yeah, I just reached out to Jay not too long ago. Thank you once again for stopping by. Heck yeah. I look forward to this discussion. MAW. What's going on? Thank you for stopping by. Yeah, Ryan's out there saying that he wants Tank Davis and he's got Fortuna. So, you know, it's one of those things where I do believe that they had a deal worked out, and they said that that's what broke up the potential fight talks between Ryan Garcia and Usyk Cruz, is the fact that they supposedly had this deal in place. So, you know, it's at least, I'll give Ryan Garcia this credit. This is at least a pretty quick turnaround, right? Given that he just fought Emmanuel Tego a couple of months ago. So, you know how like Jaime Munguia is about to have another fight, and this one is just on the heels of him beating another clearly outmatched opponent in his last fight. So if they're going to be filling up the calendar and fighting every 2 to 3 months, that's okay, because it still gives us enough time, assuming that Javier Fortuna doesn't pull off the upset against Ryan Garcia. If Garcia gets by Javier Fortuna, the turnaround is quick enough to where we have enough time to have a potential 2022 fight between Ryan Garcia and somebody perhaps more significant. So if this was a case of Ryan Garcia only fighting like once a year again, or twice a year, and one or both of those fights are against, you know, mid-elite tier opponents, I would have a problem with that. But since this one is coming pretty quick, I think that Ryan Garcia still has enough time to give us, you know, one of the fights that we would actually want in 2022. And I obviously, after covering George Kambosos and Devin Haney, I want to get in a little bit. I want to get into Stephen Fulton versus Danny Roman. That fight is also taking place this weekend. Very important fight. It's going to be taking place in the 122-pound division. That's a super bantamweight, or junior featherweight, 122. Basically, that was the division where Guillermo Rigondeaux for a few years was the best in that division. Ray Vargas was another longtime belt holder. He was holding on to the WBC belt. He never unified or fought Guillermo Rigondeaux to settle that score. But yeah, 122, Stephen Fulton, who's coming off the heels of beating Angelo Leo, and then beating Brandon Figueroa in a very close decision. Like, Stephen Fulton has had a tough back-to-back wins against super high-quality opponents in 2021. Well, he's about to fight former champion Daniel Roman, who actually lost his 2 belts against Akhmadaliev. So if Fulton beats Daniel Roman, there's no doubt in my mind that the next fight to be made at 122 will be for all of the belts between Stephen Fulton and Akhmadaliev, who is from Uzbekistan, but who has more of an athletic, slick style, flashy style than the other guys from that Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan region, like Triple G or Janibek. Akhmadaliev is a very interesting fighter. And then, of course, I want to get into the upcoming fight. Now, this fight's going to be taking place next Tuesday. It's going to be taking place in Japan, so set your clocks. It's going to happen very early in the morning, between Naoya Inoue and Nonito Donaire. So I want to get into all of that. Stan Tucker, what is going on? That's my pops. Hey, Dad, thanks for stopping by. War Deity, Ventru, what's going on? Thank you once again for stopping by. Always appreciate our back and forth and our talks. A lot of interesting points, that you bring up in a lot of the comments and commentary. Heck yeah. So yeah, I definitely want to get started with this one, and we'll get right into a quick recap on Tank Davis versus Raleigh Romero. Now, going into this fight, the idea was that Raleigh Romero was going to be totally outmatched. Gervonta Davis, we do know him to be a top tier elite fighter who he's one of the very few fighters in boxing right now who actually has a pay-per-view worthy following. He's now had about 3 or 4 pay-per-view headlining fights Gervonta Davis has. So going into it, I thought Raleigh Romero was going to be totally in over his head, and I thought that it was going to be on, Gervonta Davis as to when he was going to apply just an all-out beatdown because of the skill gap between he and Romero. Well, this fight ended up being a super close contest where, I saw credible scores like Mike Coppinger from ESPN, previously from The Athletic. He had Raleigh Romero up 3-1 after 4 rounds. And I don't think that a 4-1 Romero score going into the 5th round or going into the 6th round would have been out of line. I was totally surprised at what I was watching. Now, some people think that this was actually by design. They thought that Tank Davis was pretty much trying to set up the big shots and lure Raleigh Romero in where, that Raleigh Romero has some defensive, liabilities, some vulnerabilities in his, sweet science nature of the game where he does keep his chin up high. And, some people think it was not a question of if, but when Gervonta Davis would get that knockout punch. But look, I had Romero up 3-2 going into the 5th. I think, I was watching the fight with my dad. I think he had the score even more, maybe lopsided towards Raleigh Romero. Now, these were kind of swing rounds. Gervonta Davis didn't land more than 20-something punches in total. So it was a tense fight in the sense that there weren't a ton of punches being thrown. You could tell that both guys were defensively cautious. I thought Raleigh Romero was much better defensively than I expected him to be. And I have to say, Tank Davis was a little more feast or famine than I thought he was. I've always thought Tank Davis to be an excellent boxer who happens to also have dynamite in his gloves, especially his left hand. Absolute crushing, devastating knockout puncher. But I've looked at him as being a high IQ fighter as well, with a lot of technical skill. I didn't like the feast or famine nature of his approach to the Raleigh Romero fight. And I didn't like his vocalizing in complaints, basically trying to appeal to the ref, saying that Raleigh Romero was roughing him up a little bit too much. I didn't expect that from somebody of Gervonta Davis's caliber. And even in the post-fight, Gervonta Davis said, I couldn't just rush in there, which, we all knew that he wasn't going to just rush in there, but he respected the hell out of Raleigh Romero's punching power. And he was also kind of, taking a step back. Raleigh Romero was the one who was, applying the pressure in this one, where, yes, Davis was skillfully setting up traps, but he wasn't doing a ton in the meantime to win the rounds where he's not scoring something big. And that's what I mean by the feast or famine nature of Davis's game, at least in this particular matchup. Hey, what's going on? TJ's in the house. Thank you for stopping by. Coral and Dennis, thank you for stopping by. What do I mean? What do I mean by what specifically? I'll answer your question. You said, "What do you mean? What do I mean in the feast or famine, or by saying that I had Raleigh Romero up by a round going into the sixth round?" But the judges, sometimes you have to take the judges' scorecard with a grain of salt. And I know that those are the only three scorecards that actually matter. But I don't see how you could have watched this fight round by round and say had Tank Davis up 4 rounds to 1, which I saw some people had Tank Davis up 4 rounds to 1. I just didn't. He just didn't throw enough punches to be earning 4 rounds out of 5 going into the sixth. Again, he landed a total of 20 something punches. So I just personally didn't see that. And I saw him again taking a step back, and you could say that it was his measured approach, but I thought that Romero's pressure was backing Davis up step by step while he looked to land a counter left hand, which of course he eventually did. And the stoppage, that's another question. Some people thought that it might have been stopped too late, or I'm sorry, too early. Others were like, what are you talking about? The referee saved Raleigh Romero by stopping the fight. I get both sides of the argument. I've seen worse in terms of stoppage. I've seen people who are way more hurt and way more unable to intelligently respond to the referee's instructions and take that step to the side or take that step up to the ref and show them the gloves. I've seen people who are in worse straits than Raleigh Romero be allowed to continue. Now, I'm not protesting the stoppage. I do think that one could have gone either way. He was clearly rocked, and he didn't have all of his wits about him when he did get back up. But I don't think it was a terrible stoppage, but I also don't think that it absolutely needed to be stopped. But, some people felt like Romero was shaky even minutes after the knockout, where he was walking back and, he was walking with his dad, and his dad was kind of holding him up as he was walking out of the gym. Still looked like he was super cloudy, still looked like he was unsure about what just happened. So yeah, if all of those, are true or even partially true, I don't take issue with that stoppage. Yeah, James said Raleigh is as bad as I thought. Tank actually better than I thought. He's shown that he's good at setting up traps. Now, James, we've seen Davis set up traps in the past, right? He set up a beautiful trap against Leo Santa Cruz, where Santa Cruz came in with the 1, 2, 3, then he back up 1, 2, 3, and then he came in one too many times, and Davis saw it, measured, and threw that counter left uppercut, lights out, right? So I feel like we've seen Davis set up traps. I don't love that Davis appears to be going in the direction of knockout or bust. I mean, he's given up rounds in the past. Gave up a few rounds against Usyk Cruz. Again, I thought that he had a hurt left hand against Usyk Cruz. But he gave up rounds against Cruz, gave up rounds against Mario Barrios, gave up a few rounds against, Pedraza, gave up rounds against Leo Santa Cruz. I thought that one was kind of back and forth. So I thought that with all of the great boxing I thought he showed against Usyk Cruz after he hurt his hand, where he's basically one-handed keeping Usyk Cruz at bay to an extent. Now, I thought he was losing some of the rounds, but I thought that he was doing great work with the one good hand that he still had. I didn't see too much of the sweet science against Raleigh Romero. Again, maybe this was by design. I'm just saying I didn't like the looks of it, having previously viewed Gervonta Davis as an A-level boxer. Punching power aside, I had him as a A-level boxer. I'm not totally sure about that. Now, if Raleigh Romero goes on to beat a Javier Fortuna or a Usyk Cruz or somebody who's like ranked maybe 6 through 12 or 15 in the lightweight division, then we have to reassess how good or bad Raleigh Romero was. Because a lot of people think that he was straight trash. Other people think that he's a lot better than advertised. And I don't make much of Leonard Ellerby trying to boost his stock, saying that he would knock out Ryan Garcia, saying that Raleigh would knock out Garcia. That's promoter talk. I don't make too much of that. So Jayon, what's going on? So I want to get to a little bit of what you guys are discussing because I see some interesting comments in here. Okay, going back to the Jermell Charlo against Tim Tszyu, Dabrowski said I think Charlo's gonna stop Tszyu. He's tough, but he's not defensively sound nor a better boxer than Charlo. Also, he basically has the same style of Castaño, a pressure fighter, which Charlo has seen. I agree with most of that. I actually think Castaño is a better boxer than Tim Tszyu. I think Tim Tszyu might hit harder. I'm pretty sure that Tim Tszyu hits harder than Castaño, but I think Castaño is the better boxer. Yeah, I think that this is a much more favorable matchup for Jermell Charlo. I think Charlo will probably knock Tim Tszyu out. It could be in the early rounds, but more likely in the middle rounds. I think that Jermell Charlo will have an easier time with Tim Tszyu than he did against Castaño, and an easier time than he would against Sebastian Fundora. Hot facts with Robert Reed said Ryan better slow down, because MAW said Ryan's out there saying he wants Tank. You know what? I don't know what to make of Ryan Garcia versus Tank Davis. I've kind of been back and forth on that hypothetical matchup. There have been times where I think that Davis is too skilled and would, catch Ryan Garcia, who does kind of keep his chin high at times. There have been other times where I'm thinking, Davis is a little too... he's a little too reluctant to let more volume go in the rounds that he's not winning. So I'm thinking, if Mario Barrios, where granted, Barrios is very different than Ryan Garcia, but I'm thinking if Mario Barrios was able to win a few rounds, and plus he was a division up, he was 140, not 135. But I'm thinking there are potentially some rounds that Ryan Garcia can win against Davis behind a jab, if he doesn't get over his skis in the way that Raleigh Romero did. So basically, what does Davis do if you are not stalking him and trying to knock him out? Because that's what Davis is often looking for. He's looking for an opportunity for you to be slipping so he could get his power punches off. Now, what happens if the fighter isn't jumping into the pocket like that? What happens if he's showing a little bit more mobility, like a Jorge Pedraza, which Tank Davis has stopped? Not to say that Ryan Garcia can exercise a perfect, sweet science game plan. I'm just saying, matchups-wise, I think that it's almost as likely that Ryan Garcia catches Davis with something nasty as it is Davis catching Ryan Garcia with something nasty. Now, I tend to believe that Tank Davis would rather fight a taller fighter like Ryan Garcia than he would a shorter fighter like Isaac Cruz. But yeah, that's just a matchup that everyone wants to see, and I'm not so sure that Davis wins that one. Let's see. Dion, hey, what's up, Dion W? What's going on? Thank you for stopping by. Okay, so Jayon says Tim Tszyu is even slower unless he utilizes his head movement more often. I can see him getting chinned badly. Yeah, he does stay kind of upright. Yeah, I agree with that. MAW says, if Haney wins, we know Kambosos has the rematch clause, but if Kambosos wins and Loma is still at war, hopefully Kambosos versus Tank. Yeah, okay, and we're definitely going to get into Kambosos versus Devin Haney, which, by the way, I do have a preview of Kambosos Haney. Go give it a look if you haven't. I tried my best to thoroughly analyze that one, and I do want to kind of go over a lot of that, or at least some of it in this chat with you guys. So, but yeah, that's true. Now, here's the thing. If it's a draw between Kambosos and Haney, they're supposed to run it back as well. And, spoiler, I think that this one might result in a split draw or a majority draw. And it sounds kind of crazy, but the thing is, there's more than one way to arrive at a draw. You can have one judge go Kambosos, one judge go Devin Haney, and then the third judge go 114-114. Or you can have one judge go either Kambosos or Haney, and then have the other two judges go 114-114. So there are a couple ways that we could arrive at a draw here. I think that my suspicion is that I think that Haney is going to control more minutes of more rounds, where you could give him a 7 rounds to 5 type of edge. But what I'm wondering is, when you couple the crowd noise with with just the atmosphere, the venue, and the styles, George Kambosos kind of having that, the Canelo style of fighting Golovkin the second time, where you're kind of sitting back, then you jump into the pocket, let some punches go, and you start looking like you're taking the fight to the opposition. I don't know if Haney's going to be showing more volume behind the jab and his work to the body, or if Kambosos with his combinations is going to be throwing more of the punches. But I think that we're going to see Kambosos control the round for less time than Haney is controlling the round, but for the perception to be that the 1 minute or 45 seconds to 1 minute that Kambosos is winning in any given round as being more explosive than the 1.5 to 2 minutes per round that Haney might be winning. There are a lot of variables here between Kambosos and Haney. We have Jay Foreman said, I like Tank, and at the end of the day, he got the KO, but he was supposed to easily beat Cruz, easily beat Romero. To me, Romero was giving him problems and winning the fight. I agree with that, Jay. I agree with that. And it was tripping me out because, again, it was almost like there weren't a lot of bullets flying, right? Like, we saw a few, hard attempts. Like, Romero was trying to get Davis out of there, just like Davis, when he would throw, was trying to get Romero out of there. And there were a couple near misses for Davis as well, right? There were a couple like beautifully placed and timed uppercuts that barely missed Romero. So it's like, woo! But for a lot of those rounds, it's almost like you're watching like a horror movie or something, and it's a little too quiet, right? It kind of builds the drama, the suspense, where it's like, damn, both of these guys are looking very patient. Which is what had me wondering, I wonder what Davis is sensing or seeing. And then you would see them kind of get tangled up. And then Romero, in the second round, kind of threw Davis to the ground when they got tied up. And, Davis kind of tripped. And it just looked like Romero was roughing Davis up. And all of that was kind of interesting. And then you saw Davis, just talking a lot with the crowd. And I'm like, I just didn't know what to make of it. Now, Davis says that's how he gets comfortable. He says, otherwise, I start panicking if I'm too serious and not talking with the crowd, not smiling and having a good time while I'm basically at work. It's just that during the action, I didn't know what to make of that. There was just a lot of things that didn't have to do directly with the fight that I was seeing from Davis that I wasn't sure how to interpret. And you couple that with the lack of punch volume and the fact that Romero could have very easily been getting out to a sizable lead on the scorecards. It's just not what I expected to see from Tank Davis. So yes, he did score the big knockout, dramatic knockout, something that could be memed. I've already seen tons of memes. I'm sure you guys have as well. And it was a highlight reel type of finish where, like Floyd Mayweather hit Hatton and Hatton went into the ropes. This was a little bit like that. But nah, Floyd was in full control of Ricky Hatton by the time of that knockout. Davis didn't appear to be in control of this fight to me at the time that he knocked out Raleigh Romero, to the point where when Davis did score the knockout, you see his reaction. He was still screaming, and I get that he's excited, and he always jumps on the turnbuckle and celebrates. I get that. But then when he ran back and got in Romero's face, this was a grudge match, a highly emotional fight. I just thought that there was a bit of relief in Gervonta Davis when he scored the knockout. Tell me if you think I'm totally crazy, but I sensed relief from Team Davis when he scored that knockout because it didn't appear that they were totally in control of this one. Yeah, TJ, what up again? Yeah. So TJ says Raleigh was more active, but Tank was landing the cleaner, more effective punches. I could agree with that, but there was so little volume. There was so little to go on to give Davis rounds. Otherwise, I kind of had to lean Romero in at least 3 of the 5 rounds going into the 6. Just because of the activity and because he was landing some punches. I saw him. Did you guys catch that moment where he faked the right hand and then he threw the left? He caught Tank Davis so cleanly with that one. That was like, you see different people mix in different styles of feints. Like I saw Janabek the other weekend fainting with his feet where he's like stomp, stomp. Like he's doing step, and trying to get a reaction that way. Some people will feint with their hands, and I see like Leo Santa Cruz has the habit of shaking his gloves, between punches. Some people will kind of like fake by pulling their hands back like that, trying to get a reaction. Some people will head fake. Some people will fake at the like torso area and bend. I saw Raleigh Romero throw a feint where he threw his shoulder and then he comes with the left hand, and Davis bit. Davis was like kind of frozen with the feint and then just ate the left hand cleanly. So look, Romero was, to me, exceeding expectations in the sweet science part of the game. Again, he exceeded what I thought he could do footwork-wise, where I saw him make Davis whiff with a few of those punches, where Davis thought that he was in range, but then Romero would just quickly step out of range as Davis began to punch, and then the punch would just go zipping by. I saw that a few times. So we'll see what, Raleigh Romero's really got going forward. I hope he's not, too psychologically damaged after this. It was a pretty embarrassing finish to the fight, but he's better than I thought he would be. Or Tank is wasn't, at least on that night, wasn't as good as I thought he was or should have been. One or the other. Andres Diaz, what's up, Andres? He said Raleigh got destroyed, solid stoppage. I think that it was a fair stoppage. I don't think it needed to be stopped, but I don't have a problem with the stoppage. James says the one thing Raleigh has is a little power. Horrible footwork, chin up. I agree with the chin up. Horrible footwork. I didn't think his footwork was as bad as I thought it was going in, but we could definitely discuss that going forward. Basically a brawler. He is still a bit of a brawler, but again, I think he did exercise a little bit of sweet science and technique in just the minute-by-minute action against somebody as good as Tank Davis, Like when somebody is clearly outclassed, it should resemble Floyd Mayweather versus Arturo Gatti, or just something where it's like, yeah, this guy doesn't belong in the ring with this guy, like Janabek versus Danny Dicknam the other weekend, something like that. Raleigh was definitely rocked. Yeah, MAW. I agree. Raleigh did not respect Tank, and that's the biggest mistake anyone could make, trusting their power too much instead of playing it smart, safe, and waiting. Andres Diaz said that. Yeah, I was surprised at Raleigh Romero's audacity in this one. I'm like, damn, like maybe he really thinks he can win this fight. I mean, if nothing else, he fought with a lot of belief and spirit, and maybe it did backfire. But he definitely had his moments, and I think he made this fight, going into the 6th round. I mean, did you guys think that that's what it was going to look like through the first 5 rounds? Because I would have never guessed that. I would have thought maybe Raleigh Romero could catch or take Davis and hurt him, but more than likely, Davis is going to nearly decapitate him at some point in the first few rounds. That's what I thought was going to happen. Haney will have to dominate to get a decision in Australia, James says. I think he'll have to win pretty convincingly. Kambosos' last 3 fights are split decisions. Good point, TJ. Yeah, against Lee Selby, split decision. Against Mickey Bay, split decision. I personally thought Lee Selby deserved a close decision win against George Kambosos. I didn't have a problem with Kambosos being granted the decision, but I thought that it could have gone either way. That's why I almost feel like this is a tale of 2 Kambosos. I don't know which one to trust. The one that we saw against Mickey Bay and Lee Selby, or the one that, just totally upset Teofimo Lopez. But I think I'm starting to believe more and more that that fight had as much to do with Teofimo Lopez's strategy and game plan than it did Kambosos being some outstandingly amazing fighter. Because he looked great. Every time Teofimo Lopez tried to regain control of that fight, Kambosos had an answer. And I feel like he tried to punctuate a lot of those exchanges against Teo. Anytime it looked like Teo was starting to build confidence. Very impressive win for Kambosos. Raleigh said that he's got Tank's blueprint. He did decent, but we need a quality, durable boxer puncher to try to beat Tank. Raleigh's really only a puncher, MAW says. Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. I'll tell you this. Around the time Gervonta Davis beat anybody from Pedraza all the way up to Santa Cruz, and then Mario Barrios at 140. I would have given him versus Lomachenko, especially as Lomachenko's getting a little bit older, and then we saw him, with the shoulder injuries around the time he was fighting Linares, and after the Anthony Crolla fight, which Lomachenko knocked Crolla out. I would have given that one a 50-50 between Tank Davis and Lomachenko. I cannot say that today. Like, the way that Lomachenko beat his last couple opponents, Richard Comey and Nakatani, now granted, neither of them are Tank Davis either, but the way that he beat them just makes me think that him versus Gervonta Davis would be a stylistic, not a mismatch, but definitely not to Tank Davis's advantage. I think that Davis would need to score a couple knockdowns or a knockout to beat Lomachenko. I just don't see the minute by minute, round by round going well for Gervonta Davis at this point versus Lomachenko. Lomachenko is showing too much multi-dimensional work. We can do it. Totally trolling. Yeah, that is totally not appreciated. And that's the type of behavior that's only permitted in a live chat setting, because that doesn't fly in the real world. Yeah. MAW says Matrix versus Tank would be fire. I agree. That is two of the better fighters in the division. And, both can make a case to be in the top 10 pound for pound. Right now, I don't have Tank in my top 10 pound for pound. I do have Lomachenko in my pound for pound as it stands. Tank would need to look for the KO versus Lomo. Yeah, it's too many angles, too many combinations, and I just think that the footwork gap it will be apparent. Davis, he doesn't have bad footwork, but it's pretty episodic. When he's moving his feet, it's not to necessarily control range or to win, the 15 to 20% pockets. He's increasingly looking to land the big shot. Lomachenko he almost looks like out in the wild. If you see a predator kind of like, jabbing at the prey or just kind of poking and prodding, but not fully attacking, but just kind of showing himself that he could breach the gates. That's kind of Lomachenko's attitude, to where it starts to, increase activity-wise, to where when he starts to pick this lock and then pick this lock, before you know it, he's found like 2 to 4 ways to get to the opponent, where once you get to like the middle rounds, it's almost all Lomachenko in a lot of his fights. Not to say that it would be that lopsided against somebody the caliber of Tank Davis, but I would have to favor Lomachenko as it stands right now. Really quickly, did you guys watch the Erislandy Lara versus Gary Spike O'Sullivan fight? Lara scored a knockout of O'Sullivan. Lara is now at 160. Lara, it does not move his legs the way that he did when he was in his physical prime. He's a much older fighter. He's about 40 years old. But boy, he's loading up on that left hand. Like, his style now is like, I'll take one step at a time instead of moving around the ring the way that he did against Canelo Alvarez. He's a lot more limited in his mobility. It's going to make for, I think, some fun fights. And I know that people stylistically haven't liked Erislandy Lara, just in terms of style, because sometimes you just wish that he would throw more punches. But overall, Lara today, the way that he's kind of like coiling back like a snake and then throwing his left hand, it's a very entertaining style. And Gary O'Sullivan's never been a defensively blessed fighter, so it felt like it was only a matter of time. But yeah, Erislandy Lara definitely is looking for those vulnerabilities in his opponent. I don't think that he's going to do well against the top 5 in the division, but I think that they are going to make maybe like a Lara versus Jermall Charlo fight, or Lara versus somebody else in the top 5, top 8. I just think that Lara needs a big fight, and he's old enough to where the fighters that wouldn't have fought him several years ago would now want to fight Lara because he is a big name. Yeah, I agree. Andres Diaz says Erislandy Lara does not have legs anymore. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, he's pretty much just like a step and slider versus somebody who's moving around the ring. You think, okay, so Eubank Jr. beats, TJ says Eubank Jr. beats Arislandi Lara. So here's the thing. You know what? I actually agree with that. After seeing how Lara couldn't get over the Jarrett Hurd style of attack, I think I would lean Chris Eubank Jr. over Arislandi Lara. I agree with that. But here's the thing with Chris Eubank Jr. I feel like he's got very fast hands and a lot of power. But even in his last fight, I felt like once it against Liam Williams, once he asserted control, dropped Liam Williams, hurt him a few times, it's almost like he doesn't have the round by round ability to control the action when he's not landing something big. It's a little bit like Jean Pascal to me, where it's like, damn, I wish Jean Pascal would let his hands go a little bit more. You know, it's kind of a, I'll give up a minute of the round so I could blast you in this 10-second pocket style for Chris Eubank Jr. So I could see, I feel like Chris Eubank would have to hurt Lara to win the fight. Otherwise, I think that Lara it might be a little bit too skilled if the fight goes to a decision without any knockdowns, to where I could see Lara still edging Chris Eubank on the scorecards. Like, we've seen Chris Eubank lose to, I mean, he lost to Billy Joe Saunders. And granted, Billy Joe Saunders, I think, is a better mover, or at least was when he fought Eubank Jr., better with his legs at being mobile than Arislandi Lara is at this stage of his career. So there was a bit of news earlier this week, and I want to get to some of your, yeah, Spike was touching him up. Hey, when Spike Sullivan was starting to land on Lara, did you kind of think that, is Arislandi Lara going to be in trouble? Because you know he's 40, and it's like, if he can't put this other guy away, if O'Sullivan starts to get emboldened and starts to get on his front foot and is able to take Lara's punishment and keep coming, you wonder how Lara would handle. Well, I mean, he did fight Brian Castano a couple years ago, right? And it did result in a draw. So he barely had enough to hang with somebody as good as Brian Castano. But that's only going to get worse in the coming months and years, especially once you hit 40 years old. Yeah, Eubank is durable. I agree. Eubank does have a chin, and Lara is significantly smaller. He's probably, you know, out of his depths ultimately at 160. I mean, who's the last guy he fought? LaManna? So we'll see when he fights somebody better than O'Sullivan in terms of seeing how far Lara could take it at 160. But he might be ripe for the picking. For anybody who wants a name who's not as good as they once were, now's the time to fight an Arislandi Lara. Even if he is, you know, he has a dangerous and deceptive left hand still. So Liam Williams and Lara is a dead even fight? Tell me. No, I think you're right. I think Liam Williams is basically a better version of Gary O'Sullivan. I think he hits a little bit. Well, I don't know if he hits harder, but I think he's a better boxer. I thought Liam Williams, you know, he got knocked down a few times against Demetrius Andrade, but I thought that overall he fought Andrade pretty well. He lost the fight clearly, but if that same Liam Williams fought Arislandi Lara today, I feel like that one could go either way. Burt Wood is in the house. What's going on? Yeah, Burt Wood and I, we go back with just about every fight. Yeah. Thank you for stopping by. Jay Foreman says, even back in the day, when Lara fought Angulo, that was a big fight. That was such a consequential fight. Do you guys remember Joel Julio as well? That was another big fighter at 154 at the time. But when Lara fought Angulo, he was getting hit a lot. He was. People forget about that fight. A good pressure fighter will beat Lara now. So I would say yes, and I think that it takes a good pressure fighter to beat Lara. But Lara did at least fight to a draw. That one could have gone either way against Brian Castano, right? But yeah, Lara, it was blood and guts versus Alfredo Angulo. But El Perro, like, you know, Angulo was on top of his game around that time. I'm trying to think of which fighter took the last remnants of the prime Angulo out of him. Because there were a couple consequential consequential fights for Angulo. The first loss, I believe, was against James Kirkland, when James Kirkland was still on top of his game, and then it was Erislandy Lara to beat Angulo. But yeah, Angulo was dangerous for some time. Yeah, Joel Julio, Colombian. Or was he Colombian or Puerto Rican? I don't remember. You might be right. He might have been Colombian. Heavy hitter for sure. Yeah, Lara's old. Hot Fast with Robert Reese says Lara's old, but he could catch anyone, especially if they are lacking that, in that night. I agree. Who do you have in Spence versus Crawford? So I'll address this one for a second. Andres Diaz. I'll try to do this one as quickly as possible. I've gone back and forth. Historically, I've been with Errol Spence on this one. I have thought that Errol Spence, and it was mostly because he was showing me the great work at 147 for longer, right? So when he was beating Kell Brook, and even before that, when he was knocking Leonard Bundu out, because at the time, Leonard Bundu had only lost once, and it was via decision to a prime Keith Thurman, when Keith Thurman, in my opinion, was one of the two best fighters at 147, not named Floyd Mayweather or Manny Pacquiao. So as, Pacquiao was fighting like the trilogy fight with like Timothy Bradley and fighting, Jeff Horn and others, and Chris Algieri, and then Mayweather was like retired or half retired, and we knew that Mayweather wasn't going to come back to fight like a Kell Brook or Keith Thurman, right? So when Errol Spence was coming up, Keith Thurman had beaten Leonard Bundu via decision. So the fact that Errol Spence knocked Leonard Bundu out in the way that he did, that one, and then when he beat Chris Algieri by knockout, I'm like, yeah, Errol Spence is for real. And then obviously when he beat Kell Brook and then Lamont Peterson. So over the years, I've been with Errol Spence on this one. I saw Terrence Crawford as a newcomer, especially when he was fighting, Amir Khan. Jeff Horn, that was an impressive win. He stopped Jeff Horn. I didn't think that he was going to beat Jeff Horn that convincingly. But I was so used to seeing, Terrence Crawford when he was at 135 was winning via decision against like Breedis Prescott. But now seeing, the way that he stopped Sean Porter, even though I thought that was a very, very competitive fight, I think that at the end of the day, it's going to be a super, super, super competitive fight. But I still think that Errol Spence is going to beat him via a very close decision. It might even be a split decision. But I still think that Errol Spence has enough, even though he got hit a lot against Yordenis Ugas. He did. And he's been hit a lot in a few of his fights now. Like, he's really been going through the rigors. He's been fighting damn near nothing but top-tier opponents. So that's what you're going to get when you reach that level. Terrence Crawford, has been getting hit as cleanly, as often, and he's been making shorter work out of some of his opponents. So, he stopped, Amir Khan, where he didn't have to go the full 12, or he stopped Kell Brook in a few rounds. So I don't think he's taken as much damage at this point as Errol Spence, but I still think Errol Spence has just enough to edge Terrence Crawford. And we could get into the stylistic reasons as to why. I do think that Errol Spence's, the way that he controls the opposition with his right lead hand is going to play a big part in that. I think that his intelligent pressure is going to play a big part. And just like the sheer size and physical strength, I think it's going to have a lot to do with it once they get into that phone booth, even though Terrence Crawford is as good as anyone at finding those clean power shots to hit somebody with. Even better, in my opinion, than Errol Spence at finding those perfectly timed, clean, super clean power punches. I think he's got the edge against Spence in that regard. But I think that the 30-second by 30-second, again, minute by minute action is going to go slightly in Errol Spence's favor, especially because I think Errol Spence is underrated at changing the angles once he's in punching range. I think that his sidestepping activity, people don't really credit Errol Spence with having great footwork because he's not like a mover the way that some of the more happier footed fighters are. But the intelligent use of his footwork, I think, is very underrated. And I think we would see that come into play as he's pretty much taking the angles against Terrence Crawford. But I think that fight, obviously, it could go either way. And nothing would surprise me in that one. But I think that I would still lean Errol Spence Jr. in that one. quick bit of news that I want to address. Deontay Wilder is possibly returning to the ring. He announced that he's coming back. I just want to touch on this for a moment. A future Hall of Famer, I think. I know a lot of people don't really love his track record. I don't think they love his skills. I don't think that they really feel that he developed into everything that he could have been in terms of the boxing aspect of the game. He obviously is in love with his power, and why would you not be? But you would obviously want to see him work on other tools. But, you know, if Deontay Wilder does return, I still think that he beats just about all the heavyweights in the division. I think that a good return fight would be against somebody like Robert Haney. That's who I think he should target first, just to get, you know, his confidence back, get his bearings back. Yeah, TJ. Yeah, I agree. Wilder Haney. I think that that is the fight to make for Deontay Wilder. And then maybe a Wilder versus I was going to say Andy Reid. That's the that's the NFL coach. But Andy Ruiz. I think that Wilder versus Helenius, then Wilder versus Ruiz, hopefully is what we get. But still, to this day, the fight that I'd want to see as much as just about any fight in any division is still as limited as you think, or as, you know, as many times, it's only twice, but Anthony Joshua losing and Deontay Wilder, I still want to see Wilder and Anthony Joshua get it on. I've been wanting to see that fight for years. So hopefully we get that. And Wilder's, you know, sounds like he's returning. So to me, that's good news for fight. That's good news for fight fans. It's bad news for Deontay Wilder's health. He's now, you know, past his mid-30s. I think he might be 36 now, if not 37, maybe 36. So, I mean, I know heavyweights age differently than fighters in other divisions, but you really, depending on what he looks like when he returns and how close to 100% he still is, he could still do some things, and I think he could still get some big wins. And who knows, depending on how fragmented the title picture gets after the dust settles, after AJ versus Usyk, or Usyk versus AJ 2, and whatever Tyson Fury does next, when the title picture becomes fragmented, Deontay Wilder can definitely get back into position, I believe, to earn a share of the heavyweight championship. But yeah, I thought that was interesting news. Rackety Tam, what's going on? Thanks for coming through. So James says Bud. Rackety Tam says, bro, really? I thought Bud might take it. Bud might take it. I would just slightly still edge towards Errol Spence Jr. I still think that his fight-by-fight opponent quality's been better. And I think that he's got some natural gifts that I don't think Terrence Crawford has. I think Terrence Crawford might have a slight hand speed advantage, but I don't think that you would see a great hand speed advantage for Terrence Crawford in the fight with Errol Spence. I don't think that it would look like Crawford has a hand speed advantage when they fight. And quite frankly, I don't know how Terrence Crawford would deal with Errol Spence's probing lead hand and the different things that he does with it, because he doesn't only jab with it, he does a lot of things to move the opponent's head, to, you know, work his feet into position. He just has so many tools, and I didn't always know that about Errol Spence. I just saw him as being a patient hunter. But, you know, after seeing the way that he handled the clearly outsized Mikey Garcia, and then the way that he controlled range against Danny Garcia, I've just seen him win in too many different styles. And I know that Terrence Crawford has many styles as well. We'll get further into the Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence, or should I say Errol Spence Jr. versus Terrence Crawford, since he's holding 3 of the 4 belts. We'll definitely dig deeper into that one. Yeah, Helenius. Wilder, yeah. Lara did pretty well against Canelo. Stan Tucker says Lara did well against Canelo. Yes, that is another fight that I truly believe could have gone either way. I didn't have a lot of problem with Canelo winning the fight. The thing about Lara's style in that fight is that, unlike his fight against Paul Williams, where I flat out think that Lara was robbed against Paul Williams, I think that Lara left the door open to too much judging interpretation by not doing enough to seal the win. The same thing that Robin Conceição did against Oscar Valdez. Yes, you could argue a Conceição win, but I think that he left the door open with inactivity. Edward Espinosa's in the house. What's going on? Thanks for coming through. Heck yeah. Good to hear from you. Billy Tucker, that's my little brother, y'all. Billy Tucker, thanks for coming through. Yeah, me and him, like we talk boxing all the time. We just talk boxing like some fools. Billy said, I think Bud sets a trap and capitalizes off Errol's aggression. For real? You've seen all the Spence fights too. Like you really think that Bud sets a well-designed trap and makes Errol Spence run into something big? It's definitely possible, and we've seen Errol Spence kind of get kind of jolted around a little bit, right? Like, yes, he did look tremendous, I thought, against Yordenis Ugas, and damn, he stopped Ugas. Like, let's not discount that. Like, in hindsight, we might say, like, oh, yeah, Ugas might have been a B+, A- guy, and Errol Spence is Errol Spence. He just did what he had to do. He did what he was supposed to do in stopping Yordenis Ugas. I'm thinking, nah. Yordenis Ugas, like, you might call him an A-, B+ guy, but I don't think most people thought that Errol Spence was going to get a stoppage against Yordenis Ugas. I think most people thought that Errol Spence was going to beat him via decision. So, like, let's really tip our cap to that performance. Like, yeah, thanks, MAW. I always forget to ask people to hit the like. I just get so involved in the conversation. If you haven't hit the like, please hit the like. Yeah, thanks. Shout out MAW. Errol Spence does throw a lot of punches. So I think that, and Terrence Crawford, to me, is not a great defensive fighter. He's a great finisher. He's proven to be a great finisher. And again, I think he's one of the best at delivering fight finishing combinations and punches. And he's one of the best at just flat out hurting the opponent. But good looking out. Andres said he already hit like. I appreciate you, Andres. But I do think that Spence does more work minute for minute that should earn him the rounds. Rackety Tam said, Lara beating Spike broke my heart. I knew Lara was gonna win, but I cheated for Mike. I cheated because of his mustache. Yeah, Gary O'Sullivan's got one of those like handlebar mustaches. He just looks like someone who would be like in the what was that movie? The one with Leonardo DiCaprio, takes place in Ireland. You know what I'm talking about? A really good movie. Gangs in New York. Yeah, like Gary O'Sullivan just looks like somebody who's like from a bygone era and who would have scrapped with the best of them back in the day, usually a fun fighter to watch, but man, he's been taking some beatings, especially against like Jaime Munguia. That one got ugly. Yeah, Dabrowski said, I wonder if Crawford could handle Errol's power and work rate. The work rate, I'm not sure. That's the thing. That's why I'm leaning Errol Spence. It's the work rate, but it's also it's an intelligent work rate. We've seen reckless work rates, but I don't think that's Errol Spence. Yeah, I agree, James. I think that Spence's right jab should give Bud Crawford problems. And by the way, you know how Bud Crawford likes to switch stances, and and my dad was the first one to point this out to me. And I definitely agreed after observing further that people say that Terrence Crawford is truly ambidextrous, right? Basically as good from one stance as he is from the other. I clearly think that he's better from the southpaw than he is from the conventional. Now, there is some strategy involved. When you're fighting the first couple rounds as a conventional fighter, the opponent is, trying to figure out what's going on from the conventional stance. So they're saying, okay, he's throwing the jab, and they're trying to like dictate or at least kind of, learn the range and learn like what punches might be thrown at them, what angles he might take from a conventional stance. But then when you switch to southpaw, now you've got a whole other can of worms to deal with. But it cuts both ways, because if you do too much stance switching, not only does the opponent have to adjust to the new angles that you're presenting, but now you've got to deal with the new angles and the new view and what you need to do defensively against the opponent now that you're in a different defensive construct. So it could cut both ways. Now, it's cut the right way for Terrence Crawford to this point, but I don't think that he could just switch stances willy-nilly against somebody the level of Errol Spence Jr. LTAMTC, what's going on? Spike can't beat a A-level fighter. No, he can't, at least to this point. But yeah, he said, but I respect the mustache, as do I. Robert Reese said it's all about the pace with pace. If Crawford controls the pace, he can win the fight. True. I don't see him controlling the pace against Errol Spence. I could be wrong. Yeah, somebody said that O'Sullivan looks like the dude off Sonic the Hedgehog. MAW said that. Yeah, I agree. Also, I just a couple quick fight announcements. Oh, just one other bit of news. Anthony Joshua hiring Robert Garcia to prep him for the Usyk rematch. I touched on this a little bit earlier, but yeah, think that's a very interesting combo to me. I was wondering, who else he was going to bring in to help him in his camp, Anthony Joshua. And Robert Garcia, one of the most famed trainers in the game, one of the most experienced trainers of the game, trainers in the game, has trained everybody, as I said earlier, from Nonito Donaire to Antonio Margarito to Brandon Rios. Throw some more names in the comments. He's trained so many good fighters over the years. Fernando Vargas, way back in the day, although I think that was his dad and him training Fernando Vargas. They used to have the gym up in Oxnard, La Colonia. They have since moved to like Riverside, so that's where Robert Garcia gets down these days. But yeah, he's Mikey Garcia's older brother. Anthony Joshua, yeah. The thing about Joshua and his approach to Usyk, there's only so much you can learn in one fight camp. So I don't think that you need to reinvent the wheel with Anthony Joshua in this upcoming rematch against Usyk. I do think that